if you have any questions, or if anyone, has any questions or challenges, don't be shy. It's a work in progress. And so everyone's kind of working through it together, and I'm more than happy to share, my background and stuff. And
well, great. I started recording, if you can't see that.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that.
Yeah, I just started right now. And this, if anyone's just catching this, they should know that this is, although not really part 2, it's not like we were purposely stopped and are going to continue, but this is our second talk. Rebecca is a practicing lawyer and has experience in tribal law, among other areas. Would you say that's a fair thing to say?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll go ahead and just give you a recap on my
Please, yeah.
professional background, just because I kind of lawyered out of it in the last video. It's just natural. It's due to my training, but I'll try to be more direct. So I have a background in philosophy. That's my undergrad. And then I went to law school. I practiced injury law mostly, and then partly insurance defense. And one of my employers requested me to get a Navajo license, and that's how I ended up with a Navajo license to practice law. But I had a really strong background in the Indian law before, and that's why they asked me to do it. So I had researched several Indian land claims, and that was kind of my area of interest for reasons that we can get into later, but mainly the Black Hills land claim, and also the San Ildefonso land claim, because I got to go to law school with one of the governors of the Pueblo. He wasn't a governor at the time, but he was before and after he went to law school. So I kind of assisted him on his tribe's land claim, which is really interesting. And so we can probably get into that a little later, but just to kind of illustrate some of the Native philosophy concepts that I was raising earlier. And I said that we really need to get into this because to understand the true governance structure that holds the tribe together, you have to understand the mindset that the individuals possess. So, and basically that is really divergent from our own Western view.
Yeah, and I would love for us to focus in on that. I think the differences in the tribal law between what we have here is crucial to understand, because we can start to unwrap and unravel the history of what all's happened. It's been a brutal history all around to both sides. We are taught to believe that it was Americans that were destroying the native population, but it was actually something much larger. Columbus didn't discover America, he erased it. And what we're seeing today, and what you and I, what Rebecca and I are doing, along with a lot of other patrons, is we're actually working on a movie that's telling the story. So everything that we're talking about right now is important research, so we can really focus in on this message. Before we go on, I want to remind people, and feel free to correct me on this if I say this wrong, but as we discovered last time in our talk, anyone who's living on a reservation, they actually do not have the ability to govern themselves on anything above a misdemeanor. That it's actually requiring a FBI, right? I think it was the FBI jurisdiction would then have to come in and fulfill that quote, quote, justice. Does that sound right?
I see what you're getting at. Yes. So what happened to the Indian tribes when they entered into treaties with the U.S. federal government is that they entered into a trust relationship with the U.S. government. And so I believe the tribe is the trustor and the U.S. government is the trustee. And so as a result of that, there are several implications. One of them that happened was the tribes, they lost their criminal jurisdiction for criminal crimes above a misdemeanor. And so it's fairly settled precedent that the tribes don't have felony jurisdiction. And so that's something that the federal government is obligated to do prosecute their, felonious crimes.
Or not to.
Yeah, or not to, based on the resources.
On their own discretion and what it is that their main goal is. Because we need to keep in mind that justice makes society grow. The lack of justice makes society not grow, die. In fact, if we look around the world, we'll see that there is a same world power that every 18 months goes into another country and violates their own sense of sovereignty and justice. And what we see when we come out of that is not necessarily a healthier nation. In fact, many times we're leaving them more crippled, and there is a profit system that can be put in place there. It is profitable to have a crippled nation when you are a much stronger nation. In many ways, you can look at the reservations as crippled nations that have been shrunken down to, a raisin, basically, withered raisin in size.
Yeah, I think some of the tribes have had more success in adapting to this, two-world life than others. I think that's fair to say. And I believe there's a book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and I think he kind of goes into what you're describing, that phenomenon where we go in and there's just enough time for people to forget that we went into another nation a year and a half ago, but then we go in and like Libya and so many others.
Yep.
I was there at your live stream when you read off all of the invasions, and
I didn't even get through it. That was like an hour and a half live stream, 2-hour live stream, and we didn't even finish. If anyone doesn't know, what we did is we set a timer in the background that every 2 minutes it was sounding an alarm, and I would have to say what was the next country. And it really did show you how when you do it slow enough, people are not able to do the math and to determine that these are the footsteps of a very, very giant spider. You can look up and see the belly, but because it covers the whole sky, it's very easy to just deny that it exists. And I think I don't think that's what we're looking at now. That's what we did to the people that were living here before. Before we go too far, I also want to just throw out some real quick statistics for people. The first of which is that about half of the Seminole tribe was actually Black, African American. What you had is a system where if you came to America and you did not want to be a slave, they had a word for you, and that was Seminole. The same thing happened around my bioregion, Koala, where I live now. We call Koala North Carolina now, but before we called it North Carolina, it had its own name and its own rich history. About 1/3 of the Cherokee population, this is the Eastern Cherokee tribe, was actually white. These were people that had decided, I don't want to settle with this queen colony crap. I would like to just live off the land and be sovereign. And so they did. Furthermore, if you were to go up north, you'd find that a lot of the Huron were actually French, the exact same story. People were coming over here and discovering that they could live off the land. They could have their own form of life, and sovereignty was blooming. You could even argue that because sovereignty was blooming so well, it became a very large problem for this same kind of force. We're reminded of these stories where we have pictures we actually have the documents of warnings that have been posted on these forts saying, if any of you grow your hair long, if any of you interact with the local natives, you will be shot for sedition. It was so crucial to them that they maintained this colonial ownership system in the mind inside this cannibalism. We've been calling this word Wetiko as a holder word. There's many words for this. When dingo, it's spelled a lot of different ways, but it's basically this, what I'm calling an egoic cannibalism that's befallen us. And so many of the natives saw this come over and understood exactly what we were facing, that this is a machine, basically. An empty human ends up serving this larger machine. And it ends up erasing all of our history.
Yeah, absolutely. And rewriting it.
Yeah, definitely rewriting it. And although this is probably a tangent, I want to remind people that this most of America, Quetzalcoatl, is covered in serpent mounds. These are old ancient burial mounds that, frankly, we don't truly know the history about these areas. It's been erased from us for reasons. I personally think there's something to do with the bone technology, where you're able to tap in and remember your ancestors. These mounds are sounding boards, but they've been shut down, or we actually just don't know.
Yeah.
We
Oh, we
seriously
built
have
our country right on top of them.
That's right. And if you look in the Old Testament, you see the exact same stories of we must chop down the Asherah pole. We must scatter the altar with the bones of another. This is almost like how you would erase a hard drive, is that you would
Yeah.
spread these bones, these shattered bones on top of it. So, so much of our goals here are to reawaken the land, the soil. And on contrast, what this machine wants is to do the exact opposite, is to keep the amnesia going, keep the numbness and the inflammation stopping us from tapping into our roots below the soil. And so much of this is happening via the law, via the
Exactly.
way that the laws have changed. We're looking at and this is where I'd love for you to take off on this, Rebecca, and just see where you go with it. But we have this system of a bottom-up government, where government is a tapestry of agreements. And I'm talking about the people of the Longhouse and the Iroquois Confederacy that had, and the Cherokee, that had these very advanced systems of laws that were already in place. But it was all a percolated government. It was from the grassroots up. You saw these things in powwows. You saw this in a tribal circle. There was typically a tribe mother, yes, a matriarchy. She actually had a red chief and a white chief. During the times of peace, the white chief, she would appoint the right chief to be in charge. During the times of war, she would appoint the red chief. The important difference between their system and ours is that they had a unanimous form of government. They didn't do things unless everyone agreed. The power of veto was not, it wasn't about majority rule. It was simply, look, we are all sovereign men. It would be impossible for us to do something unless all of us agreed to it. It's a totally different way of looking at government than looking at it now with the top-down majority rule kind of system.
Yes, indeed. And also, when you have a small group of people like that who are looking out for the best interests of the tribe, you know, you can have some discussion of, well, what would that be? And, you know, just kind of tailor a solution. And that's one of the hallmarks of Indigenous law, is that everything is very tailored for the individuals involved, because each individual is placed within a tapestry within their group, and so they're born into a family, and you know, it's a very strong knit network. And so all of the people are in agreement of what the law is, and it's maintained by each other. And so it's not typically necessary to go to a leader for interpretation of the law, because everyone is holding the group together based on that law. And it's something that's difficult to I guess obey. It's something that you have to be a real strong person to live like that. And so that's why there's so much pride associated with being a member of this tribe, because this tribe is held together by its own laws, and these laws are what make us proud people. Mm-hmm. And so they can say, well, the other people outside of this group, they don't follow these laws. And so there's this ethnocentrism that comes along with being in a tribe, and that's why there's this tribal identity. And it all goes back to the relationships within the tribe, so the individuals' relationships, and where they're situated in their clan, and so on and so forth. And then even the tribes themselves are organized sometimes. So if there is a disagreement per se, then, you know, there might be a split, you know, historically in a group. I guess that happened a lot with the Pueblos, and that's why we have so many Pueblos now, is because there were a lot of migration stories, and they kind of, you know, migration is typically a big issue of where the group is going to camp or settle, or, you know, and so if you're herding animals, sheep, for instance, then you might have, you know, a customary grazing area that you customarily use. If you're camping with a group that's hunting, you know, you're going to be following the trails, and the animals, but all of this is just based on what are the needs of the group right now? What are the needs of the community? You know, who's most capable of helping? You know, what are our goals? And so it's a very organic kind of governance structure. I'll go ahead and go back to, you had mentioned Columbus and the doctrine of discovery. And you really hit the nail on the head with this one, because the doctrine of discovery is the linchpin of all of this colonial law, Indian law, everything that's come out of this phenomenon basically has been justified by the doctrine of discovery. And underlying that doctrine is basically the concept of property. And so under the concept of property, we have different aspects. Basically, the court defined property differently for the tribes and then for Western civilization, because the tribes didn't buy and sell land. They basically attributed use and occupation of land to the Indians. Whereas, as you know, Westerners famously will go through land transactions and buy and sell land, as well as use and occupy it. And so, as you can see, there's an expanded definition of property that happens with Western law in regards to whether they're looking at an Indian tribe or a group of Westerners.
Let me ask you, would you say that possession really becomes the only definition of ownership in Native American culture? What I mean by that is, to possess the land is to dwell on it, to live on it, to use it, which means that if you were in Montana, it would be impossible for you to own land in North Dakota, because you're not in North Dakota. Your ownership is a bubble around you. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, unless you were, say, there was seasonal use and there was joint use with another group. Joint use areas, I think, were attacked really hard by the U.S. government because they weren't recognized as, you know, single use areas. Like if a tribe occupied this area only, and then, you know, they only ventured out during certain seasons or for certain reasons. So you have that too. Gotcha. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it sure does. The 5 tribes that made up the Iroquois Confederacy, the people of the Longhouse, they would actually meet in a longhouse, but also their land was divided into these 5 regions that were considered theirs. They possessed them. And just like you said, they had other land that was more shared use. And there was a lot of tribal war, in fact, for centuries over that land, over who was allowed to use it, who wasn't. It was actually the Iroquois Confederacy that first established some peace, that said, look, we're all going to share this land. It's all cool. And they really made a nice system, because on the western side of the people of the Longhouse, they were more concerned with their borders.
You mean the Seneca side?
Yeah, I think so. They were concerned because their border was not surrounded by a tribe that they trusted. It was exposed. So
I'm sorry, could I interrupt you for a second? Could we just take a quick break? I'm sorry, I'm going to have to take a break. Could you pause the recording?
I can't pause, but it's going to break.
Okay. Just hang on one second.
You need to go. Take your time. Yeah, but I can't pause the recording because my computer. Last time I paused the recording, I don't have the processing power to join 2 recordings together. That's why I'm telling Rebecca that I can't pause. But take all the time you need, Rebecca. I know that you've got a little one that needs, and that's totally fine. Feel free to get up as much as you want. But I meant to tell you this before we started. I don't have the computing power to pause the recording anymore. It's funny, but at the very end, when I try and merge them, it has to open up the gates of hell to join these foreign forces and make.
We don't want that.
So
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. You were totally on a roll. And
that's
I was
okay.
really hoping my baby was going to take a nap while we had a talk.
That's okay. The point that I was making with, and I believe it is the Seneca, was that because their territory actually was on the outer boundary of the people of the Longhouse, they had a stronger commitment to borders. They were very much into, say, New Mexico, Arizona, where their southern border is not wrapped by another state or another nation. The people of the Longhouse were able to solve this because the two tribes that had the outer edges of their land were given more priority and authority when it came to how they were to defend their own territory. So again, it's a very much a bioregional approach. And when I say bioregional, what I'm really doing is just trying to find a word that we can all agree on that says localism, connection to the land. A government that's connected to the land is going to be unique based on the geographical location of that land. So a government that's way up high in elevation is going to be much more focused on surviving in colder temperatures, while a nation on the coast is going to be much more dedicated to defending themselves against a navy. These are the focuses that we would all have in a decentralized government, where we have more of a sovereignty system alive and coming into play. I want to remind people that another big difference to the tribes versus what we think about now was your connection to your ancestors. When Russell Means introduced himself to Congress in 1989, he didn't actually give his name in the public record. He viewed his life as just one head on a totem pole or one bead in a rosary. In fact, he said, "Hello, my relatives. I am an Ogallala Lakota. I come from a very sacred holy land, the Black Hills, where Yellow Thunder Village is. My mother is from the War Eagle clan, and my father's family is from the Crazy Horse clan." He is expressing himself as an avatar to his genetic DNA tree. He is just one link in that chain. And when you have that kind of approach to things, it becomes impossible for you not to be connected to the soil, because quite simply, your ancestors are buried below your feet. All that wisdom, all the epigenetic wisdom is going to be resounding from the ground below you. And I think this is really the key to all these migration programs we're seeing. The reason why so many people are being forced to migrate is because that's an easy way to cause a psychic amnesia, where you can sever that connection between you and the ground, which really fits in with this whole idea of private property. We have a new definition of private property that came in with this Wetiko, which is what you were hitting on. This concept that ownership has nothing to do with possession, that you can still own something but never see it, taste it, stand on it, or walk on it. That's a pretty insane notion if you think about it. And it makes sense that the Native Americans never really took that seriously, because it was not something that they ever really had a concept for.
Yes, exactly. And so you can see how there is definitely a trip up occurring. Going back, and if you look at Indian land claims, you try to go back to the earliest possible point where you're connecting the tribe with the land. And oftentimes this is in their oral histories and their indigenous knowledge of their group. And if you go back to basically where it was that the land, allegedly transferred to either the U.S. government or some other situation, you're looking at a land transaction. Underlying most of the land transfers were land sale transactions that occurred between the tribes and the government. Oh, here you go. Okay, so we have, let's see, what's the date on this? We have the Department of Interior. This is probably during the allotment period.
Yeah, 1910, I think.
Okay, yeah, that's about, yeah, here we have sealed bids allotted Indian land. This is when the US government basically sold off Indian land for pennies on the dollar. It's really a shame, but this is why you end up with checkerboard land out by Indian reservations.
Right.
And they got a lot of land transferred into fee status, which means that you can buy and sell it, because you can't buy and sell Indian land, it's held in trust. So even if there is a land sale contract between an Indian tribe and a US government, a lot of times there was a huge language barrier. And so the agreement, I mean, there's so many issues with these land sale transactions, but one of them is the language barrier. The other one is under Indigenous law, it's you can't always bind a group. An individual can't bind a group. And so you might have a land sale transaction by, 5 males of warrior age, and, no one else even signed the contract. And then this contract reportedly transferred all kinds of tribal land to the US government. Another situation you have is, even if there was an understanding, the parties simply didn't have the same concept of property. And so the Indians had no concept of selling land. They had no idea that they weren't going to be able to use it, or, so on and so forth. So it was, there was definitely a lack of meeting of the minds as far as a basic contract goes. And so if you look at our own country, I mean, the truth of the matter is, even our own land sale transactions today, underlying them all, they're all going back to an original land sale contract that's likely void.
Wow. It's a really good point.
And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, and, people can take it with a grain of salt, but, everyone's just going to have to deal with this. I mean, no one wants to give up their private property, but it is an issue. And so we're going to have to deal with it as a group. And I mean, we can stick our heads in the sand and pretend this didn't happen, and that's what we've been doing. But, you can see how it definitely inflames some Native tension when, Native people say, well, this is all Native land. I mean, this was 100% Native country. And, and so I guess that's why I feel the Indian tribes are really used in psyops a lot in our country. And, they're right on the front lines. And so, they're just, there's a lot to that issue, but,
the most dangerous are the ones that feel the most free, that feel the most sovereignty. And if you're the government, you're going to find a way to eliminate the most dangerous first. And I think there's nothing more telling than just understanding this cannibalism became crucial to conquering the Native Americans. And Crazy Horse was stabbed in the back. Sitting Bull was shot by his own people. Spotted Elk was shot by his own army. Geronimo died a war prisoner. All of these archetypes were subdued in a very methodical and systematic way. It wasn't a coincidence that all these things were happening within a few short years. We had a state-run assault on the land, and anyone that had any connections or memories to it. Welfare whiskey is a perfect example of this. This whiskey wasn't even sold. It was distributed. This was a chemical, this is date rape, but with cultures. This is literally how this went down. And so even as we try and embrace our own rights to private property, we definitely, I think you hit the nail there by saying we're living on voided on contracts that were not valid. We are living on invalidated land as a whole. And I think that there's something to be said about possession is ownership. Those who attend their land are definitely the owners of it. So even if we were to do some massive change like this, most of us would not be affected in a negative way. It would only be the ones that are pretending to own land that they've never seen, touched, went to, visited, improved, or lessened in any way, shape, or form. And these are invisible people. Most of my money every month, the majority of what I spend goes to a compound interest loan on a mortgage of my house. The person that holds that mortgage has never stepped foot here, has never seen me, doesn't even know what the property looks like. It shows you just how broken this system is, that the majority of my calories every day is spent serving a master that I cannot see, touch, taste, feel, complain to, or solicit. Not only that, but as these years have grown, he has then turned around and made it my responsibility by law to also hold insurance on his own property. So you end up with an indentured servitude, but over our time, not our livelihood. And that's a subtle way of getting the same thing, but calling it something different. It's still slavery now, but we're just enslaved by time instead of by body or by force or by physical binding, basically.
I see what you're saying. Yes, I agree. These debt contracts are nothing but just slavery, debt slavery.
Now, did you say that people living on a reservation are not allowed to sell land to each other?
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. There's no sale of Indian land unless there's an act of Congress, I believe. So because the Indian land is held by the U.S. government in trust for the tribes, the U.S. government can still take the land, and that's what occurred in San Ildefonso. And as a result of that taking, because the land was being held by the Department of Agriculture, I believe, and I think they transferred this land to the Department of Energy, and after that, they ended up building the city of Los Alamos and the labs, the atomic labs, and that's where they built the atomic bomb.
Wow.
Supposedly. And so this was as a result of a taking by the US government of Pueblo land. It wasn't actually it wasn't the grant that they received from the King of Spain. It was a different piece of land that they used. I believe they called it Sacred Mountain. And so this was a very sacred place for them that it goes into their ceremonies and their secret stories and language and everything, but they had used this mountain since time immemorial, and they ended up losing it to the U.S. government as a result of this taking.
I see that. Yeah, in fact, I think this is a good map for people to kind of zone in on what we're talking about here. This is the Manhattan Project signature facilities, and right here in Los Alamos, New Mexico. Is that right? Los Alamos,
Yep.
New Mexico is
Bingo.
the B-side assembly building gun site. That's above the Trinity site. And it's, what's interesting about this, Rebecca, is that in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where these other three sites are, that's like prime Cherokee land.
Wow.
Strange. It makes you wonder if this is part of the amnesia campaign, is like purposely using these sites as their reset facilities. In fact, look right here by the Great Lakes is the metallurgical laboratory. And then of course the Manhattan Project itself, which is on DC. It's almost like under Paris, under Rome, there are these catacombs of bones. And it really makes you wonder what's under DC, what kind of Native American history was specifically on that island. More importantly, what kind of bone technology has been utilized to erase the same history. Again, it's so fitting that it's Columbus, because you have a Columbia archetype to erase the land. with the icon of a light. That's what's so interesting, is she's bringing a light, but what she's bringing is amnesia. Very
Yeah.
much like the Men in Black, the the
Yes.
little stare into the light, you know, kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah, you nailed
The
it there.
amnesia is what's cutting our power off. It's because we forget how powerful we were. We're not likely to complain about how powerless we are becoming as a result of this psychopathy, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I know this amnesia.
So I don't know if I want to I don't know if we should dive into Black's Law today. I almost kind of want us to focus on as much as we can about Native American law and as it pertains to our country. I think that might be a nice way of bite-sizing these talks. But if you think that they're more related, please feel free and you know, and bring that into the discussion right now.
Oh, sure.
Okay. I also want to remind people that our bicameral house, because this fits in with the same discussion, our bicameral house was directly ripped off from the Iroquois Confederacy. This people of the Longhouse had these two, just like we have a house and a senate, they had the elders and the young, and these two houses each had their own ability to introduce legislation into the tribe. It was discussed amongst themselves, then it was sent to the next house. It could either be rejected and sent back or to go forward. Again, the primary difference would be that anyone had the power to simply veto the entire thing, which really just turned the entire system of government upside down, because it meant that you could only do things that everyone agreed to. When you have a system where everyone has to agree, you are now creating an atmosphere where everyone who wants government to work is literally trying to kiss the ass of everyone else so that they will agree. That's a much different system than we have in DC, which is more about, no, it's whoever I can get to vote the most is going to be the one that gets to take the most money as it's falling down this top-down system. All of us are collecting our money and literally pouring it into one faucet, one drain. And at the very top of that drain is DC, and they get to decide who's going to funnel that, who's going to get what. It's a completely different system. The two really could not be further apart, even though they're both based on the same thing. And I think what's interesting about this is that it's uncovering, I'm speculating right now, I cannot prove this, but okay, so first of all, I'm not speculating that we know for a fact Ben Franklin, John Hancock, John Adams, and many, many more were in direct contact with the Iroquois Confederacy and actually got their.
I would say without a doubt they stole the idea of the Constitution. Right. It's a knockoff. It's a cheap knockoff. I mean, not, you know, I say cheap because they took it and then kind of gutted it in a sense. I mean, it's a good structure, but I mean, what they did was very deliberate. I mean, you know, they could have kept it under the pine of peace. They could have kept it like that, but they didn't. I think they took the eagle though, right?
Yep.
Yeah, they took the eagle. They left the pine. So yeah, I mean, they kind of, it's like pick and choose, you know.
Definitely that. So not only were those three understood how the Iroquois Confederacy worked, but they brought that system into DC and said, this is the system that we need. This is what we want. And here's the speculation part. This is the only part that I'm saying is speculation.
Okay.
What if the founders of our country saw a government that was prosperous, thriving, and healthy, and overthrew it by pretending to emulate it? This is something that my buddy S.B. Aldrich calls paralleling, which is a brilliant way of mind control. You're basically pacing what you want to change, and once you can outpace them, you now can change the direction. So it's interesting just how similar these bicameral house is to the Iroquois Confederacy. It makes me think that This is showing you a footprint of how they were able to take over. They basically were telling the Iroquois Confederacy, hey, we want to be in your government. We want to adopt your system. See how great we are? That's why we're taking your system now and putting it into use. And it would be very difficult to imagine the Iroquois Confederacy not seeing that. I mean, after all, the chiefs from the Confederacy were invited to DC. Actually, it was Philadelphia. They were invited to Philadelphia, and they were, they were in the meetings where we were founding our new country, our Constitution. So from their perspective, they saw the settlers coming, saying, help us, teach us how to farm, teach us how to fish, teach us how to live off the land, teach us how to give our government. And now we're going to fucking kill you all.
Yeah.
And now that we have that, we are now going to spread. This is why I'm calling it a cannibalism. It's the eating of the self, because everything that was helping us was destroyed by the creation of our Constitution. Everything that was already here, that already had the links to the ground, was overwritten and erased by something that looked exactly like it, which made it easier to bind. In fact, you could say that the archetype was the turkey. The original archetype was the turkey, and it was replaced with something that looked similar, but was much more vicious, i.e. the eagle. It's a very different, the same spin, but it's taking us in a much darker direction. And that's where the matriarchy fell. And we can't even call DC a patriarchy, because it's really not. It's more of a evacuated archy. Whatever evacuated archy is, that's more of what it is, because it's the absence of sovereignty that makes government so powerful right now. It's always been the absence of sovereignty that's allowed government to balloon and grow.
I agree. It's and the cannibalism is a good metaphor. I tend to use the zombie apocalypse because of the corporate intention, how everything is built from this corporate structure. And that's not to say that people might not want to, start a business, and, there's business reasons why corporations are useful. But as far as, living people go, we're not dealing with our corporate identities. We're basically overlooking them. And so, there's got to be some kind of balance that we can achieve here. Because I know I said some strong words in our last talk, especially about the courts, and there's reasons why people want to go to court too. They want to end claims against them. They want to settle issues and, pay money, but not anymore. And so have some sense of finality, some closure, and so there's reasons why people, go to court, but there's got to be a balance. And if we're using these venues without the knowledge of where they lead to, as in all roads lead to Rome, then we're missing out on basically just knowledge of ourselves.
Yep.
If these shell corporations are, being bought and sold, and there's a lot of money being made, then, why don't we know about it? And it has to just play into our debt slavery. I mean, apparently.
Well, I want to remind people, this is a great time to remind people that during the Civil War, we had Italians fighting on both sides. And we're telling each other that, well, yeah, but that was a special case because these guys were forced to run. These are reenactors, by the way. These guys know their history. They know. The reenactors know history better than anyone else. They are immersing themselves in these characters. And as I'm reading about these northern and southern Italian fronts, I will, remind us all that we're looking at British troops, we're looking at French troops, we're looking at conscripted troops from Ireland, I think from Germany too. And it tells me that what's been hidden from us is that there's a much larger plan of attack when it came to carving up America.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't we didn't win a revolution. What happened was we created amnesia over a new land and established a new colony for the same black nobility, for the same Rome, whatever word you want to use for that. I don't care. I don't want to lose anybody by saying black nobility instead of Rome, or saying the crown instead of this. It's all the same frickin' spider. I don't care what we call it. But the point is that the best way to squelch a revolution is to tell everybody we won. Is to say, yeah, man, you totally defeated her. You really showed the crown that they're all bad. Way to go. Let's set up a government. Let's freaking cannibalize the shit out of each other in celebration. And everyone's like, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good, because I don't know what you're talking about over there. I'm too far away. I'm over here trying to live. So whatever documents you send me, I'm going to pretend that that's the truth, and we're just going to move on. This is why I said what I said earlier about really what you're looking at is the difference between decentralization and slavery. There's really no way to live in a centralized society and not be a slave, because you're simply too far away from the information, from the truth of it all, to make your own sovereign decision. You're having to base your entire life structure over rumors that you've heard in the trees that literally have been played telephone. If you think about how messages were spread back then, you had a giant system of telephone where by the time this message got down to the South, you really didn't know what was happening. No one really understood exactly who was fighting who. Why are there all these Italian troops on both sides? Simple: to start a war, to create the structure that's needed to create the amnesia. We can't have the Cherokee taking 1/3 of their, growing in size by 1/3 of their population with white settlers. We can't have that. These people have to go, hence the Trail of Tears.
Yeah.
We can't have the Seminole living on their own. We can't have escaped slaves going down and bonding with them and creating their own life. They have to go. So what you saw was a systematic emergency where we have to destroy sovereignty across the land. We have to do it as quickly as possible. Whiskey, smallpox blankets, war, pretend civil war, fake revolution, pretend discoverer, Christopher Columbus, all of that. What you're really doing is you're cutting the head off of Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl is the serpent bird that's known in Mexico and America. And the reason why I'm bringing this up now is because if you look at the myth of Pythos in Delphi, it's the exact same myth. You have two giant snakes that are known as Gaia, the earth, the connection to the soil. And in both cases, the exact same Wetiko came in and chopped its head off and created a centralized ruler. It's that emptiness that we're having now by failing to connect to the soil that makes us so malleable to this new form of slavery, this new idea that one can own property from thousands of miles away. This is basically insanity is what we're looking at.
Yeah, and so that's why I say that all these legal fictions that have served us so conveniently over the years, they've really been our undoing. And we've lost sight of what is real and what is true. And that's why I know a lot of indigenous cultures, they, while they value nice things that you can use on this planet, they don't value anything that, is unnecessary or, because in the end, you're not going to be able to take it with you. And so, there's really no need to, collect too many materialistic items because it's not going to help you live a beautiful life. And so they have that Lakota saying that you should never own more than you can pack up in one day and carry away on your back.
Right.
And so on and so forth.
I want to read this quote from Ben Franklin. He wrote this down. He was writing someone else, a friend. Sorry, guys, I can't remember which friend, but he said this. No European who has tasted savage life can afterwards bear to live in our societies. The care and labor of providing for artificial and fashionable wants, the sight of so many rich wallowing in superfluous plenty, whereby so many are kept poor and distressed for want, the insolence of office, all contrive to disgust them with what we call civil society. And if you're having trouble understanding his language, he's basically explaining that the natives found it disgusting, our cannibalism. They found the flesh-eating virus that we had with each other to be something that not only did they not find appealing, they found it dangerous and gross. It truly shows you what we were up against, what was happening there, between the differences between nature and Babylon. And it's this crucial difference between these two that really show you the power of this machine that keeps rising in our psyche. I'm showing you this graphic here because a sigil is typically an icon that you can charge with a certain amount of power. And here you have the sigils of nature competing with the sigils of Babylon. And as you're listening to my voice, you might be looking at these and honing in on certain icons, and you're going to either feel a strong aversion or a strong attraction to each of them. And that's showing you just how much prana is moving in and out of your being right now as we experience these. And I would argue that almost all of us, if not all of us listening right now, could identify every single icon on the right by its shape, yet only maybe identify 3 or 4 on the left. And it really does show you in a very clear way just how systematically we've lost connection to what's important to this land. And this film that Rebecca and I and many others are doing is fixing that. It is a connection. Man is the living soil. That's what Man from Katua is all about. It is showing us how to tap our roots back down into our memories and find these forgotten stories so we can re-empower, reinvigorate, and stop the cannibalism. Because this is getting nuts, y'all. This is getting way too nuts.
Yeah.
This isn't getting better. It's getting worse. And it's only through us awakening that we can fight against that. Rebecca, I want to end this recording here because I think it fits really well with our discussion about tribal law. And if you do us the honor, I'd love for us to get together again on Black's Law next and discuss that too. Does that sound like something we could do?
Yes, I'd be more than happy to oblige.
Great.
This hour really flew by.
Yeah. Well, it's actually, I think it's a perfect way to kind of cut it here because the Black's Law is really its own full hour, I think, for sure. Absolutely. If not longer. So it'll give us a chance to give these bite-sized morsels. It's not every day that you can find a lawyer who's willing to sit down and honestly talk to you about the history of the law and as it pertains to natural law. And so I'm really blessed that Rebecca's joining us and I can give you this talk because I think it's really showcasing just how crazy making we have this system is that wraps all around us. So I'm going to let Rebecca say goodbye and we'll sign off for now and catch back up soon. So yeah, Rebecca.
Okay, folks. Yes. Thank you so much, James. We're very blessed to have you too. And I really enjoyed our talk. My baby wants to say goodbye. Are you going to end the recording so we can just...
Yeah, you stay on the line. I'm just going to tell everybody because I never do this. Hit like and subscribe, please. If it'd be great. It'd be really great. Maybe share this and consider joining our movie. Right now, you can become a full producer before the end of this month. Right now, it's a very small contribution. Basically, the money is just your prana saying, "Yeah, I believe in this." You can join for as little as $5. It really goes a long way. There's 78 of us right now. This movie is probably going to take us a year to film, and it's going to be a lot of these kind of conversations, but really tinctured down into a very entertaining and fast awakening ceremony through cinema. So we hope to see you then. Thanks much, and talk to you next time.